ibisitaw Pago na dia sa si none other than si Cathy Flores McCollum. Familiam Flores, last I heard from Tatotamuning, estilo si Cathy Flores McCollum za kamu kalantay yun recognisay na andi didi. Cathy has been very, very active no naging CHamoru land rights, if you will, in a shorter version of what she may have to say. She's very knowledgeable about how the military will come in or how they got involved into land taking. And this thing is catapulted, this interview or this podcast is catapulted based on recent news from KUAM about the property over Manila, Mafananan Eagles Field, in which we are all anxiously awaiting to see whether we're going to get some sort of astronomical funding to build a hospital, about $1 billion worth of funding, or a medical campus, Mafananan. Or rather, kung ginu sa familiar Flores, yulo, ni masangan ay manana timan maapasi. They did not get compensated from the military. Pero ano hungo kadugin news who has to see Cathy 13 years ago. I was talking to Cathy about something similar to this. Ni lamigyan na familia ganigi itano di Irslata ni tiban mana isalapi anay manajan ni militant matsuli itano pero manasat bi for defense purposes. Most of the pristine land that we have here on the island of Guam, man matuli todo ni militant for defense purposes, you know, and you drive around the island and you take a look at those wonderful places, Gitutun, NAS, Pesasigatin, Nimitsio, beautiful view, Anderson Air Base, bonito to Nalgat, Northwest Field, bonito Nalugat, and then we come to Litegzan, or as they coined it, the military Ritidian. So are you from Ritidian? What part of Guam is Ritidian? Is it right next to why I go? Or, you know. Anyway, it's my pleasure to introduce Cathy McCollum, Flores McCollum, the kumukalan un ginanungan sa nanaan hasu iprotehi Litegzan, one of the landowners over at Ritidian or Litegzan. It's a pleasure to have you, Cathy. Buenas dan half a day.
Buenas and half a day. How are you, Ken?
I'm good. Good to see you. It's been a while there, Catherine.
Nice to see you too.
You know, but just a little bit of the backdrop here. I've had the pleasure of working with your dad when, you know, Sidufuntu Jose and Estaba Land Management. He was a brilliant man down there, and he knows about land taking and stuff like that. So
yes.
I guess some of that blood just flowed off of you as to getting your rights as to what is ours law. Cathy, a little bit about yourself before we continue with some of the questions that I will be asking you. They're not hard.
Okay. All right. My grandfather is Benigno Leon Guerrero Flores on my dad's side, and my father, of course, is Jose. His wife is Dolores Matanani Martinez prior to the marriage. And the reason why I mentioned my grandma is because her family is actually the one who introduced my grandfather into that Ritidian. They got married, and then they stayed with the Pangilinan family because my great grandma remarried from a Matanani from a Martinez to a Pangilinan. And then they all were raised down at Litegzan. The Martinez is the Bing family.
Okay, Bing
and
family.
My grandfather is Apu, familiar Apu for the Flores.
Oh, okay.
And so when they got married, my grandfather loved the land, and he felt that this is where he's going to raise his family. And so he decided to purchase a property from Mr. Jose Flores. I wouldn't be surprised if they're related to the ones in Manila. But I think the purchase happened, I'm not really versed on the year, but I know it was way before I was born, way before my parents were even born. And so Jose sold the land to my grandfather in, where Litigden is, I think, area 5, Fanan, or area up to 5 to 8. But you know, and then later on, he found out that the property was actually in the military came in, and 2 officers were swimming in the beach and decided to they liked the place, and next thing you know, they had were given a lease condemnation, and the whole families. It was just so sad that my grandfather worked for the military, was working for the Air Force. He found out about this lease condemnation, and then he tried his very best to try and see if his family can remain at Litigden. So the efforts for the military didn't happen yet until 1962, where they took my grandfather's property, and my grandfather protested that, and they took him to court. You remember, in that time, we didn't have a governor. That's in 1962. So we were before. My grandfather was before a military judge, a military jury, and so they decided all together that they were going to give more money to the families, all the families at all. They call it the inclusive of all the families, that they were going to give them a much higher amount of condemnation amount.
Okay,
But
and
what happened?
okay, can you back up just a little bit? Of the lease condemnation committee,
They
was there an
a lease
existing lease
condemnation.
on the property?
A lease condemnation was just a small lease. It was just a very small amount of money that they were giving, and
Also,
then
those 2 officers that were swimming decided to lease the property per
right.
se and condemn it that way for a certain amount of time, for a certain period of time.
Yes,
That's a
yes.
lease. Okay, continue. I'm sorry.
Because I believe they were trying to finagle with the Congress to get more to ask them if they can take more land. Well, since the war was over, and they actually claimed they took the property for war. They didn't return everything. They decided they want to keep Rutidian, and so my grandfather said, no, we want our land back, and they were supposed to return all the lands back to the people of Guam. In those times, they were supposed to. They had a land return act. I'm not sure if that's Public Law 103-339, and they were supposed to return all the properties that the military decided not to use. Which one of it was Rutidian? It was actually, at the time, it was being used for recreation purposes. My grandfather was so upset that they didn't return Litigden. They wanted to continue having it, and so that's why, he went against it. But up until 1973, my grandfather made friends with all the commanding officers that we remain in our ranch, and we remain, able to enjoy the property as owners of the land. And the commanding officers were fine with that. Now back to the judgment. They forgot to put more money in the coffers of the federal government, and with all the condemnations that was going on around the island, they forgot to add more money. And so when one of the families, which is, I believe, the Castro family, tried to cash their check, it started bouncing that they didn't have any more money in the federal side. And my grandfather never accepted any money from them. He was so upset.
But Cathy, just backing up a little bit, when those 2 officers decided that they want to do a lease condemnation, and to me, the way you were explaining a lease condemnation is actually we'll lease the property, we'll condemn it, and we'll lease it from you for our purposes in the military for either recreational use or defense purposes, but he was not getting any money from that lease on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis? Isn't the military give him some money for the use of that?
Well, the lease condemnation, they really, from what I was told from my Uncle John Flores, was that the lease condemnation didn't come in every month. It came in when they felt like giving the money. And so when they decided to completely condemn the property for a taking, they came in gunpoint and told my grandfather to get off the property.
Well,
Now,
that's
really,
a gunpoint because your grandpa did not want to leave the premise, right?
right. He refused to.
Yeah.
He refused to recognize that the land taking was happening. Plus, the people around him were telling him anyway that their lands, they still own the land because the military never gave them the complete money for it, or they forgot to put money. So if my grandfather had any, they condemned the house for about $12,000. The house was a prefab ranch style home, and so when they condemned that, they added another 24,000 for the. I'm just coming out with figures. I could be wrong, but the actual condemnation that they first started with was way below, way below. It's like maybe 5 cents a square meter. And
how large is the land there belonging to Benigno?
I believe about 14 hectares.
14 hectares?
Yes. Plus, my grandma is even bigger than that. My grandma's property, the Pangalinans, it's way bigger than that, and that is encompassing where the big buildings are, the buildings that and it's mowed and maintained by the Fish and Wildlife, but that's just the Pangilinan property. Plus, we own it all the way to the cliff line. We had a cave. Each family had a cave to run to whenever there's a typhoon.
That's typical at that time for the Manamco, right?
Yeah, I wish my Uncle John was here. He'll tell you the names. It's so amazing, his mind. He had a name for every cave, and he said that's where the Mr. Castro will go to. And we had a Puluman.
I know your Uncle John as well. Again, in the revenue and taxes, Uncle John, it was such a very knowledgeable person on what the heck even tax laws.
He was heading the real property tax area.
Yeah, he was. I remember that speaking with him during my younger days as an appraiser. But so that's when they went before a judge, a military judge, military jury, and everybody was military saying, well, we have to condemn it from you folks, and here's a certain amount of money. Is that what they said? And
no, Kim. If you understand that during those days they had a business down there. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. They had the families all got together, and they had a copra business with the AK, the Acting Scroll company. Yeah, Acting Scroll. And so when my grandfather said, "Hey, those coconut trees, each of those coconut trees are worth $5 for each tree. And so compensate me for the land and the coconut trees." But of course, when they came up with the whole ending thing, the value, there was no value in the coconut trees. The business went out the door, and of course, the families there were treated with like a spit.
And just compensation when you're taking land and you discover that the shrubberies and the vegetation around that particular on that particular land is actually making some sort of income, they have to compensate for that loss of income that you guys were that your grandfather was going through if they take the land, as well as the value of the land itself. So to me, that's what I would look at. And as far as just compensation, loss of business revenue, if you estimated throughout the life term of that particular business, the investment that was in there, as well as the property value, market value per se at that particular time. So to me, that just did not sound that fair, because why am I going to pay you $5 for a tree? It's just a tree. Yeah, but that tree could make me $100 a month. How about that? If I take down he needs a place. So there's a lot of things there. But finally, what kind of compensation were they looking at? I know that they condemned the house already for 20 grand, perhaps maybe 24 grand more for. What's the 24 grand more for the land itself?
The land, which was never compensated. It wasn't complete. The house was 12,000 was only what they gave my grandfather, and the end of it. That was the end of the story. If we review the documentation from the land taken, it should have gone much higher. Much higher, but of course they forgot to put the money in the bank, and then when just a few people tried to even cash, not my family, but some people tried to cash the checks, it came back stamped insufficient fund. So that was the size of it.
They cannot do a condemnation unless they appropriated the money, especially if the federal money, if it's going to be condemned, they got to have the money and be ready to do this if everybody is in agreement. Right there, I think, unless I'm missing something here, yes, there are records showing compensation of $12,000, but it's probably, what you're telling me is just on the structure itself, the house, the ranch house, prefab ranch house. And this is back in the late 60s, early 70s that we're talking about?
The condemnation was in 1962. My grandfather built the road down to Litekzen with the families so that we can stop hiking down. My mom, who's pregnant with my sisters, my siblings, she had to hike down, and my aunt, as pregnant as they are. So Tata decided, I'm going to build a road down here. He spent almost over 50 grand just to get the road going, but no compensation for that too.
Well,
they decided they decided to condemn the road, and then we were back to going down, trekking down to Litekzen with family. It was so bad. It was really bad. I can picture it when I was, younger.
Okay, the floor is over Mangilao, the Eaglesville, which is, you could say it's miles and miles away from over at Litekjan, where the subject we're talking about is, the attitude of the military, and as far as this is concerned, and how could they condemn something when they don't have the monies available in the bank to say, okay, shoot, it's written down. And you got to remember that we became U.S. citizens in 1950. So therefore, we should have been compensated to the fullest amount based on the values that were dominant, dominant at that particular time. But the question was, did they do anything when the checks were bouncing all over the place?
Not that we know of. Not that we know of.
The checks were coming from the U.S. military. The checks, the condemnation checks.
I believe so, Ken, and I believe that they should have probably checked with Congress if they can get some money for that condemnation. And so apparently they just decided, okay, we're going to do this, and we can do what we want, and nobody's going to hear about this because we're a tiny island in the Pacific. Who's going to hear about this? So.
We're relatively negligible, right? I mean, who cares, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's what the basic attitude that I believe our families went through in those days. It was sad. It was uncalled for. I mean, anybody, even in the States, can have their lands condemned. Now they talk about just compensation. Everyone should get just compensation, no matter where it was and how big it is. Everyone should get just compensation. Anyone is liable for land taking. It doesn't matter where you are at. It doesn't matter
If
what
it's for the
country
good
you're
of the
from.
public, and if it's good for national defense, and if it's good
Right.
for local defense, if you will. See now, for
Mhm.
example, Gulf of Guam, Malum, like, I need your house right there. I'm gonna take it away from you because I'm gonna build a road right there, so that it could be more convenient for the entire public on the island of Guam to use that as a road. But and there's basically nothing that you could do if they set their minds to it. But the final thing here is you going to a bank, cashing the check that they paid you for your property.
Right.
That's what I learned. That's It seems only logical, and
Mhm.
it's also a
Yes.
constitutional right for just compensation. Even if you go down to the local mandates that have come out, like for example, the Gulf of Guam, where we have the real estate laws. So it's a no-brainer. Now, my
Right.
question is, did you folks do an appeal to the military saying, okay, we'll give you an opportunity to go and get the money from Congress, and they charged me $15 to the bank because I tried to catch a check and it bounced and I made a deposit. So did anybody in the group, Familia Mizu and the other relatives that were down there, the two guys collectively go and appeal this thing, saying, okay, fine, there's nothing that we could do, you took it away, but where's the money? Did
Right.
what happened after that? Did they just say, well, we'll get to you when we get to you, kind of thing?
Well, my grandfather tried his darndest to try and see if we can get the lands back, because I guess he figured that if you make friends with the commanding officer, there might be a possibility that he can pass the word and say, hey, these families weren't compensated. Why? And my grandfather fought that all the time. He always said that we weren't compensated. We want just to have our land back. We just want to be down here and live our lives, because that's where they lived during the war. That's where they grew their families. They buried their babies. If they had stillborn babies. I mean, this is their livelihood. This is where my grandma was beaten by the Japanese because she couldn't bend down to pick rice. I mean, there were a lot of terrible things that happened to my family, but they were happy at Litigzen. That's where they trekked from Agana, where they were moved to, and then they said they were safer in Litigzen. So they walked down those many miles. It's just from the top of 3A, driving down to Litigzen, it's 5 miles in.
Holy moly.
And it's a long, 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 long
It's a
road.
beautiful place for a firing range, isn't it?
Oh, that's another thing.
Okay.
Oh
Okay,
my God,
now,
we can
hey,
go
let's
on
go back a
forever.
little bit. I know that your
Okay.
your dad and your dad's your siblings and relatives down there,
Right.
they got together and they went into business with AK, which was actually very popular. And all the history books of Guam, you could see AK starting out the copra export here on island, because down there was so rich with coconut trees that it's probably worth more than $5 per tree, even at that particular
Yes.
time. If it's going to make
Right.
you $100 a month, $100 a month is a lot of money at that particular time.
That's true.
But it
That's
became a
true.
livelihood, and it's almost like a village there, right?
Oh,
CHamoru, no?
yes. Apparently, I had friends that had lived down in Litigzen. The government had actually a rendu property that you can rent down there. That was what do you call that? The crown lands, right? And some of the people took that arendo and started farming. There were villages before us, before my grandparents, that was accumulated down there. That's where
ancient villages is next to the beach.
it
It's
was a
next to
thriving,
water, yeah.
thriving community.
It's thriving
Thriving
community.
community.
It
Yeah.
could have been another Sumay. It could have been,
Yes.
maybe it was, and we don't know.
Yes. Maybe it was.
Maybe it
Yeah.
was, yeah. But
Yeah.
it was thriving. It's right next to the water, and off of ancient CHamoru, they go
Oh,
fishing, and then
Ah.
there's wildlife around the area that they could use for food. But let's go
Yes.
further up. And AK, what's their part in this? Was they're in partnership with your grandfather and
The
familia
Catholic, yeah,
for the copra
familia.
exports, right? But
Right.
were they leasing the land from you, or it's just a partnership between the Familian Benigno Flores and the Manilunia and AK to do this and then export the copra and for whatever reason, and then share the money, I guess, the business, right? So they were part of
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Yes, they didn't have any lease with, I don't think they did. I just know that Uncle John told me the story that they employed the men down there, and they had to trek up a certain amount of copra, carrying it on their backs. And then they decided, well, let's try and build like a little port to start putting the copra into the boats. But what happened was it on different seasons, it gets very wild. In fact, there's not any swimming that can happen there because it can get wild. So then the families are back to trekking up the cliff line
Up the hill
to
for 5 miles.
Yeah, right. I know. Tell me, it was. Plus, we had the business of changing the light bulb. We had a what do you call that? The tree lighthouse. Some of our families had the business of changing the light bulb. So they'll walk all the way down to Agatna, and get a new light bulb and bring it and
All the way
turn
up.
the
Those
yeah.
giant
So it's a lot of
light
hard
bulbs
work.
that goes around.
How do you compensate people for all of that? I don't think you can. I don't think you
Well,
can.
that's part of the loss of business. Now, if you're making income in a particular property, as far as I know, that has to be taken into account. And again, it's a commercial property, and we could actually say that this is a commercial property because on it they have the trees that produces income and other matters, and a lighthouse, and that's all part of the business. So loss of revenue. Now, how much money would your grandpa would have been making, and where would you be right now if it weren't for that? See, so those are the thoughts.
Yeah.
He had a very, very good opportunity, the familia, to become just a little bit more sustainable with the coming generations. So they took that away from you. Now, the efforts that you guys had made to get the compensation that you feel that is forthcoming, what happened to that? You're still hitting a brick wall, and I know that there's some sort of protest over Litekjan Estia. That's a Protehi Litekjan. They made that group, and how did that happen? And is it because of what you're explaining to me that's why Protehi Litekjan or Protehi Litekjan group came about? Is it because of what you were just telling me about we would say, injustice maybe by the military at that particular time? Just not necessarily just so that what they're going to do to it right now, building a firing range, but would it be part of that? Why are you using our property for this when you haven't paid us? Am I correct in assuming that's why your niece, right, Maria Hernandez?
Maria Hernandez.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, she got married, so it's May. Maria Hernandez May. Flores Hernandez May. But she had in those days she was going to school, and we were coming together to at Litekjan, and pretty soon we were having people come together. We hadn't formed an organization yet. I was in the Nation tomorrow. Right now, I continue to be the Maga Haga of the Nation tomorrow, and we do come together. But these are new groups of kids. I'm calling them kids because they're in their 20s, 30s, and it's wonderful seeing them with and hearing their ideas, and also they care about the aquifer that's going to be contaminated. Ken, if I get back up, I can tell you that being in the Ancestral Lands Commission as a commissioner, we got Naval Air Station, the land is called Tizen. When we got it back, we had someone come in and analyze the ground, because apparently the military families were suing the federal government for compensation for sickness that was
Toxic
for
waste.
their yeah. And then so when we had the analysis done, it showed that Tizen was highly contaminated. Not only was that, we did the radio Bargata, that was highly contaminated. We did all the military, the ones that they were using bad chemicals, and they're highly contaminated. Now we worry about the aquifer at Litexen. So we worry about people that the blockage, that the families that have private property around the areas, they cannot go down anymore certain times of the year because they're practicing their
How to kill people.
practice their rifle and stuff. And so whenever you shoot a gun or shoot a rifle, you are actually pouring contaminants into the soil. So the young generation now that's coming out speaking for Save Litegden, Save Retidian are actually our children that don't want to leave a contamination for their children. And this generation now is producing children, and it's scary. It's really very scary. I have the people that pick omelet down there on occasion, and they're not allowed to go down there. Some of the medicines that's the only place they find. It's really sad, and I think we're all human beings. Okay, we're all human beings. It doesn't matter what part of the world you come from, but there's many of us that are indigenous to this island. Many people are indigenous, and it's the ones that are indigenous that are suffering because the colonizers are the ones that are deciding they can do anything they want to us. But they forget that when they place their children and their families in those housing areas, they are poisoning them. They're poisoning them with all of these contaminants.
Well,
it has nothing to do with being against the military. It has nothing to do with what's going on. They're going
well, some
to
of the
start
families that
poisoning
are suing the
families.
military, especially named Muzungadzi, Agent Orange, and all those wonderful
Yes.
purple, Agent Purple, or whatever the color. And they were even using private properties, asking permission to store some of those toxic waste on their property.
Yes.
And it makes you wonder, do they really have any regard for the way of life for the natives here, or is Guam becoming actually one huge military boat that's just floating in the South Pacific, and it's so strategically located that it's so wonderful, and the people know how to speak English, and they make damn good Keligwin, let me tell you. That's about it. So, if you have the regard, if you take a look at the military and you see how they infected their own people with Agent Orange and other type of contaminants that are found years and years later, people, just spraying those pesticides over there at Anderson and Naval Station, and they're all bineno, And now these
Uh,
people are getting cancer and they're getting sick, and they were only here on a temporary basis. So what about the natives? Where are these uh, toxic waste? They're all over the island. Cancer rate
yes,
has gone up since that
right.
particular time. Some of our kids are dying very, very young. I mean,
Very
during our
true.
time when we were growing up, did you ever hear of a 30-year-old getting a heart attack? Did you ever hear of a 30-year-old or a younger getting cancer that is supposedly that cancer is not supposed to happen to a person below 60 years old?
Yeah.
So times have changed, and you just tend to wonder that. But the point too that I'm trying to get here, Kathy, is the Familian Flores, you got the Eagles Field, and the governor came out and says, based on our research, yes, they've been compensated. Um,
I
and
don't know what kind of I don't know what kind of information
yes,
that
yes,
she got
yeah,
from that, and I really feel for the Flores family, and I know they're probably the familiar Catson.
yeah.
We have Catson, we have Cabeza, and my family Apu, but we're all related. We have some interlink with each other, and I'm hoping that the governor would step back and say, "Wait a minute, my people, it's my people that are suffering.
Well, this
My people."
this could start that the situation with the Flores up there could actually start a deeper investigation into this, how it's going to come about, what's going to happen if you did prove that yeah, well, because compensation, a dollar is a compensation. Let me have your house, Kathy, I'm going to condemn it from you, here's a dollar. Now you're going to say, wait a minute, my house is
Oh,
not worth a dollar, but I have the power because I own the entire island to say, no, I'm only going to give you a dollar. And there's really nothing that you could do about it. And we've always been complacent, but we've always said, okay, well, Uncle Sam said this, so basta, okay, para tatsogi. Then they say, well,
mm,
what do you guys want? We've been giving you money, we've been giving you grants, we've been giving you aid every year, millions and millions and millions of dollars. Yeah,
Ken,
it's about time, Nick. It's about time that you did
sovereignty.
that.
Okay, let's go sovereignty. Now, everyone is afraid of that word, sovereignty. But if you ever really look at that word, it's really having the decision to decide what's going to happen to our island and not, I mean, the military's here. There's just no way around that. They're here. Now, if we had the sovereignty to decide what we're going to do on our island, then maybe everyone can step back and say, Nanga, Nanga, Nanga. You know, you can't just plant yourself here or plant yourself
How do we
there.
go about getting our sovereignty? How do we do that?
Well, we just have to push for the
Who's
self-determination.
going to find the final
And
paperwork for that? Saying, yeah,
I'm
I grant you guys
we
sovereignty.
all will sign it. We'll all sign it.
Yeah. But the thing about it is that we're under the grip of the military. And with the way the world is turning right now, with international defense, if you will,
Mhm.
North Korea and Russia and China and stuff like this. I'm not saying that they're going to start a war or whatever, but this is
I
prime
know,
target
Ken,
area.
and we're gonna be a target. We're gonna
Yeah,
be a
of
target
course.
first.
Though it's just who has the final say so as to say, okay, I'll tell you what, we'll go one step further. Esther, I'll give you guys your own political status, whatever you want. What political status do you want? You want to become a state? You want to become independent or have a relationship with the United States? Go
Mhm.
independent and we could charge the military. They still want to use Anderson Naval Station, $5 billion a year, each
Mhm.
state that they're going to be
Yeah.
using. So how's that for a startup for our own country, if you will, for our own sovereign state, if you
You
will?
said it,
Yeah.
Ken. That's a
So it's not
wonderful
going to happen because
example.
the only way it's going to happen is for the federal government to say, "Oh, okay, we'll do it," but they will not do it. Why are they going to give us $10 billion a year if they could do it for free and let you and your family and me and my family suffer? I mean, it's just a minute amount. It's just a small island. Those
Mhm.
people are brown, by the way, and so who cares? But
You
let's
know
take it
what,
further because
Ken?
that's racism already. But if they could do it for their own, where military families that were here in the 70s and the late 60s are now turning around suing them because of all that toxic waste that was around the area that they were there. So they don't really care. They don't really care who they hurt. you know. I mean, and this is happening even back in the States, in the United States. So when we
Yes,
talk
that's so
about, no,
true.
you have to be a certain color. No, I don't think it's like that. It's salakpi. That's all that it is. It's just
Mhm.
money. And it's not for you and me. You know, I heard a
That's true.
comedian say on TV one time, there's an elite club, you know, elite club, and you and I do not belong to that club, because if you talk about
Mhm.
military and compensation from the federal government, where does that money go to? It goes to their buddies, the private contractors that will come about and do all this stuff. They're the ones that's getting
Yes.
rich, and everything else. But that's a story for another day. What
Yeah.
main question is that I was asked, that I wanted to ask you? It seems, and I'll just briefly say it. It seems like there's some legitimacy to what the florists are saying up there at the Eagles Field
And
in
I believe it. Yeah.
yeah, only
Believe it.
because of things that have happened to you and your family, si Tumbinikno, and the
Yes.
people before him, and the people after him, such as yourself and your dad and Uncle John, and you and your siblings and Todi Familia. Um,
Uh,
so the sad story about the Familia Flores Gulu, the Eagles Field in Manila, they're living on land trust land. They're living
yes.
on land trust land.
Mhm.
The man is over 90 years old. The daughter's very, very vocal, as she should be, like you, like,
Mhm.
this is our rights and
Mhm.
everything. But where do we go from there? What do we do? Where do we go to say, I want my just compensation? Where do we go? We go to the US government. The US government say, I'm sorry, but we're not going to help you. Most of the time it's like that, and then they'll come up with the spiel. What do you guys want? My God, every year we give you millions and millions of dollars in grants and everything else to improve your land. Makes you wonder who's really behind the fence over here. Is it the military or us? You know,
Yep.
Kita man
Um,
kayo yellow fence. We're the ones, and they're just looking over the natives to see what kind of shenanigans they're up to again. Those dang
yeah.
pesky natives today,
Well,
them and their condemnation thing.
Ken, I read. I mean, I heard what happened to the florists is, I believe they're stricken with illness,
Yeah,
and that's where it starts. And so, hey, I went through the cancer thing. I know it's money, money, money. The poor families need help, and they're just maybe at their rope's end. And our families tried to go and take the federal government to court, but it went to the wrong court. I don't. Well, I can't say it's the wrong court because apparently Madeline had was involved in trying to get um, a road compensation for the families that were trapped uh, in Epson, and they're able to use about $2 million for the road structure to go into their property. So that opened that. It our fight for Litegzen opened
the
the
door for
uh,
that. Yeah.
the eyes of our leaders to come together and start helping the people get their lands back. Um, and so we had started the movement to protest every property that's taken from the military that are not in use. It's and just some of us had even settled into the properties, like Tizen. We had to settle into the properties in order for the senators to start looking at us and saying, hey, let the family start living into their land. Though the CHamoru land trust is for people that were displaced. But according to my what I recall in the Ancestral Lands Commission is that if you want land for land, it's got to be even equal compensation, or at least close to. Um, Ken, my idea after I left the Ancestral Lands Commission, it came to my mind that I approached the airport because they were bragging that they were getting $50 million. And I said, I went to Jess Torres and I said, Jess, what's a great idea if we get the families that are not able to get their lands back because of the airport and the runway and stuff. Why can't we just compensate them from that 50 million as a partnership to a government partnership so that they can get their just compensation and enjoy some of the monies that are coming into the airport. Of course, I never, that was it. That was the size of my idea. But I think that if the government of Guam, and I believe the government of Guam still needs to compensate a lot of people for land takings for roads and for easements and stuff, if they had come to the point of saying, maybe keeping them quiet and saying, okay, you're going to receive so much money for the rest of your life, maybe that might suffice. I don't know. I have no idea. I want Richardian back. I want to my grandpa to have his dream.
Yeah,
You
just
know,
about
and
to
I
say
want
that.
all the people.
You're thinking along the
Yeah.
same line. He had a dream and he wanted, because your grandpa's it's a very, very wise man.
Mhm.
And I've hear stories about him and the properties that he has and everything else. But he knows
Yeah.
that in the end, it's not all for him. It's for, but
For many things.
and now I'm very happy that you reported that those youngins that are out there and they really, really know exactly and coming up with ideas of how to handle this thing in their
Oh
20s,
yes.
early 30s or whatever. I mean,
Right.
what were we doing in our early 20s and our early 30s? We're doing something else, but these guys are adamant about
Music.
going forward. So what I'm trying to get at is that, we had the means now to make them be more aware. During our time, we were just a little bit more complacent about what was happening because of the war just ending 20 years prior, and it was time for a rebuild. And we've always looked up to Uncle Sam and the U.S. military and the federal government to take care of us as they should.
Yes.
But sometimes, let me just give you a few $1 million here, but in the end, you're going to take away your livelihood, and it just
Right.
doesn't. It
It's
just
their
doesn't make sense.
decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ken, it's their decision. It was never a just compensation on our part. And it still isn't, and it never will be until
How
finally
do we
money
go
has
about?
sit on the table.
Let's get away from the tech jump for a little bit. What can the florists over the Eagles Field or around that area, the land that we need to get a license from the military to build a hospital on Guam land? Uh, what do you think that they should be doing? What do you think they should do to go and seek help to get either just compensation or get portion of their land back or something so that they could survive?
Right.
Yeah.
They need something to help with the medical. They need something to
Okay,
maybe
let's
an
take a
equal portion for
well, that will give us the
the
sense of
children.
urgency, yes, for medical and for survival. But take away all that, they still have the right. If they have
Yes, they do.
$5 coming to them, give it to them. If they
Yeah.
have $5 million coming to them, give it to them.
Yeah.
If they go and they
Yeah.
hand out $1 to every citizen on the island of Guam, so what? That's their money. They could do
That's their
whatever they want to do
prerogative.
with it. But
That's
but yeah, you're sure. And as far as the urgency as to why we need this compensation, malango si mom, malango si grandpa, malango si Lu, malango padgono.
Mhm.
And why are they sick? Because of the toxic waste that's being dumped around the island. And who did it?
That's true. And also the downwinders. We're all downwinders from all the toxic in
Hey,
the air.
thank God
There you
we may
go.
see
Yeah.
some light at the end of the tunnel for that, and some families will be compensated, especially for
True.
the ones that have lost their loved ones because of
Yeah.
and it didn't have to be that way. You know what I mean? It didn't have to
Yeah.
be that way.
Really.
But
That's
you
true.
all over the island, you go down and
We're all trying, Ken.
Yeah.
We're all trying. Our age group is trying so hard, but we're not we're not going to be alive for too long.
Well,
And
the
so
energy
we
is
need
slowly
to,
being drained away from us, and it's good that we have
right?
these youngins that could go out there and they have bigger muscles and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
a bigger mouths
And brains. Oh my
and
God,
brains.
they're so
Well,
smart.
no doubt about that. That's
Yeah.
absolutely no doubt. So I
Right.
actually we could learn from these kids because of what they're learning
Yeah.
from us.
Yes.
And they find it very intriguing that it's like this. They grew up with the McDonald's here on island already, and the Burger Kings, and the fast food, and more restaurants, and more bars, and more of this, more than that, fast food and everything else. But they already know it's the matunga, it's how this thing works. So yeah,
Mm.
justice, I guess you might say that. Kathy,
Yeah.
hopefully we're going to do another podcast in the future. Just
Okay.
maybe we'll see after this crazy thing that's happening on our island, where the rate
All
of
right.
pandemic cases keep going up, and number of deaths are suddenly taking a turn to keep going
Yeah.
up as well. And God bless
Yeah.
to all those people that are trying. But my final word actually is just over hearing this or this watching this podcast. Be safe out there. And I wanted to just publicly give you my condolences too for the loss, your loss,
Thank you.
and everything else. And
Uh,
so any final word that you might want to say, Kathy, concerning the Tegtan or anything else that's on your mind?
Viva Guam, and I hope we do get our lands back and free and clear. No more of this finagling.
Yeah, really. And
Uh,
hey, what do we actually need a rifle range for? What are we
What
doing?
do we need? We have 5 already, Kim.
Yeah,
Why do
but
we need
again,
more?
the more the merrier.
I just don't get it. No, but you know what, Kim? Here, I'm sorry. There's electronics that you can pretend you're shooting at somebody. I mean, why can't that happen? It's
Isn't
amazing.
there a
I don't know.
huge partial of state back there in the mainland where they could have their training over there as how to shoot and kill
Yes.
people? Seriously.
Yes. I was in Louisiana, and that's all I saw. Military, we want you here. I mean, they're wanting a military buildup there in Louisiana. They're everywhere you go. There were signs saying, "Come here, come here." You know, and I said, "Yeah, why can't they come here?" We just buried my aunt there, so that's why I was there.
They're
Yeah,
saying
but that
that
was a couple of years ago. Yeah.
we're so important here, and we don't realize how important we are, to the point where lives of people are not, that doesn't really matter that much, so that you could defend
Yeah.
the entire world from nuclear fallout or nuclear war or whatever. And then
Right.
we're training a lot of people, ground troops over here, and the same breath the military is saying, well, if we're gonna have a war, it's gonna be a nuclear war, it'll be over in about 3 hours. Then why are we
Yeah.
training troops? What are they going to do?
Right.
What we have a nuclear missile coming in, and you're going to send out 20,000 or 5,000 Marines are going to stop the missile? Why don't we concentrate on the technology that's being used to stop those missiles from landing? But hey, we're just brown people. We're not that sharp. Maybe they're working on it already, but I still don't get why they need to build a Marine barracks here. For what reason? To train them so that they could go back and defend the continental US. It's not to defend Guam.
Yes, it's never about Guam.
It's never
Never
about,
been.
it's never about the natives. It's about Guam because it's a great
Right.
ship, big ship,
Yeah.
30 miles
Yes.
long ship.
Right.
Yeah, and then you could put those natives around that fence there, and we could look in and see how they're doing. Those damn pesky natives.
But they forget they get contaminated too. Anyway,
Yeah,
Ken, you have a good day.
you too. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank
Danke
you.
si Jesus Master.
Adjust.
Okay, bye.
Okay,
Adios.
sana masi.
Sana
Adjust.
mas. Adios.
Adjust.